Putin needs to understand what a tragic mistake he's made and what a catastrophe he is making for both his own country and Ukraine.
Now, we have a issue about the ongoing war between Russia and Ukraine. Now, we have seen many nations, those forming the NATO and the European Union, sanction Russia economically and even politically. But then we have also had African nations give their take on the matter.
Kenya and almost every African country was birthed by the ending of empire. Our borders were not of our own drawing. They were drawn in the distant colonial metropoles of London, Paris, and Lisbon, with no regard for the ancient nations that they cleaved apart. Today, across the border of every single African country live our countrymen with whom we share deep historical, cultural, and linguistic bonds. At independence, had we chosen to pursue states on the basis of ethnic, racial, or religious homogeneity, we would still be waging bloody wars these many decades later.
But my wonder in this is that does African countries have any power to sanction Russia, or do they even have any bit of power to make any difference in this war? Well, this is what we are going to discuss in this section, and my take on it is that the only power that the African nations have is the voting power at the UN Security Council, because that is where decisions are made for either joining European Union or the NATO. And another thing is these are binding treaties and agreements that are made by the UN Security Council, where these nations make agreements about war or any other economic and political actions that are taken by member countries. One, I think being a member of the UN Security Council, where the superpowers have all gone on in different areas to discard their own power and their own rules and laws that they have made in the UN. I think by a certain extent the UN Council is becoming weak, because if it were as strong as they say it is, they should have resolved the issue between Ukraine and Russia. But then African countries almost depend on the Europe and outside countries for many of the things we use in our daily lives. For instance, power, things like that is industrial material like coal, gas. So I don't think African countries have the needed power to sanction Russia or to have any impact on the war between Ukraine and Russia. The only countries that I think can affect this war are the superpowers. Now, having said that, I want to welcome my co-host to say something about this discussion between on Ukraine and Russia. What do you think, my friend?
Thank you for inviting me.
Mm-hmm.
I must agree that Africa is sort of like a beggar.
Yeah, I know.
Mm-hmm. Tumedepend sana na the West.
Yeah.
I can say that Africa will suffer the most than Russia, which is facing the economic sanctions. For one, Russia is the leading exporter of fuel. Africa has vast resources,
Yes.
natural resources, but we haven't exploited them yet. The second thing, Africa is a big continent, but I think that we are still colonized. I don't know if still colonized or we have new colonization
by the West.
The second thing, our African leaders have failed us big time. For example, ukiangalia hizo nchi za Europe,
yes,
hata within hizo economic sanctions kama venye Russia imefanywa economic sanctions, Putin ameshawapatia middle finger, ajali juu anajua country yake ni strong. What about Africa? Tuna import kila kitu, tuna export like 1% of what we produce. You come to Africa, unapata country kama South Africa, DRC, ziko na arable land, ziko na maji, especially kama DRC is very poor, and most countries on the west part of Africa ziko na fertile land, lakini yani hawaja exploit hizo resources zenye wako nazo. The other thing is like ni kama we have been brainwashed by the West.
We can't think
I
for
think
ourselves.
The West walikuwa na strategy fulani wa make Africa poor to be beggars for life.
They have imposed their own democracy on us.
Yes. I think how do we call it? The colonialists,
So
they knew what they were doing. That's why they partitioned Africa in so many countries.
So you want to say that Africans need to think, or Africans need to take the war between Ukraine and Russia with a pinch of salt, in light of what Putin is saying, that the Western is still advancing on other nations, while they do not want other nations to keep their territories or advance.
Let me put it this way. I think we should copy one thing from the West. Africa is not united.
Right? So
if it was united, I'd sidhani how comes like 80% of what we produce ama chenye tuna exploit, we export it to the West. And we have the population within us. Tunaweza trade within us to create wealth hapa Africa.
I think is because that it's economics of scale, because whatever we produce, we do not produce industrial products. Like we do not produce things like computers. We do not produce things like machinery, the machinery for manufacturing. We do not produce things like fertilizers. We do not produce things that are needed, especially for our own production. So it means, and they produce the Western, or the countries we trade with, produce things of high value than what I think the problem with the African is that we produce mostly agricultural products, and we only depend on the West to come to exploit our own natural resources.
What I can say that I think African, we are just playing dumb. Do you know why? Our education system is almost the same as what the West teach in their schools. You can't tell me there is technology for the West or China for that matter.
Well,
and for Africa,
the only problem with our education system is that it is mostly leaning on the theoretical part, not the practical area. And mostly the other thing is about we do not exploit our talents like the Western do. That is why they have exploited many parts of their natural resources, many parts of their human resource. But ours, we have so many unemployed people. That is why we do not have we do not have the power to produce as much as they produce. So coming back to the issue, that is the power tussle between Russia and the Western via Ukraine. I think that only countries with economical power and the political muscles to pursue foreign policies and place sanctions on any other country are able to intervene in this war. But African countries, we only need to keep our mouths shut, so if we do not want to suffer.